They say art is subjective. Well, at least it used to be. Now, it's elitist, gate-kept, and you need a 6-year degree to understand anything that's going on. But it wasn't always like this. And in this video, you're gonna find out how universities ruined art. You see, gone are the days when art was left up for interpretation, when it was subjective for the viewer. If you've gone to any new gallery or exhibition recently, you've found yourself greeted with walls of text trying to explain the work, trying to intellectualize something that is supposed to be subjective for the viewer. But there's something far more sinister at play here. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should still stick around, because this video will not only teach you how universities ruined art, it will also teach you how power and bureaucracy grows to the point where we can't get anything done. And it all starts with... Wait, one sec. 9/11, no. World War I, no, not World War I. The release of Super Mario 64. Ah, here it is. Weimar, Germany. The Frankfurt School opened in 1923. It was the name given to a group of intellectuals who studied at the Institute of Social Research at Goethe University in Frankfurt. These thinkers were united under their belief of looking at society through a Marxist lens and studying everything as a power relationship between the oppressor and the oppressed, an approach that would become known as critical theory. Now, critical theory is a hot topic because critical theory is an umbrella term for things you've heard all over the internet recently. Critical race theory, queer theory, critical gender theory. You know, like when Jordan Peterson says like, these bloody postmodern neo-Marxists? That's an oxymoron. What he really means is these bloody critical theorists. Many of these thinkers were forced to relocate to the United States in 1933 after Hitler took power, as many of them were Jewish. And they relocated the Frankfurt School to Columbia University in New York City. This is how critical theory made its way to the West. Now, why is this important? Because the critical theory approach is commonplace in most Western universities. If you take anything, social sciences, philosophy, art history, you're going to learn about critical theory. Now, what's the problem with looking at every single concept in society and trying to dismantle it as a power struggle? Well, the problem is just that, dismantling, destruction without rebuilding. Let's change this to a personal example. Let's say you're going to see a therapist, and this therapist is very good at pointing out all the problems in your life. You go week after week, and the therapist explains to you that your separation anxiety comes from how your mother treated you, and your mother treated you weirdly because of how your father treated your mother, and your father was in a strange nutcase because of how hard he had to work. For months and months, this therapist deconstructs every single valid problem that you actually have. Finally, after thinking you figured it out, you look to the therapist and say, okay, so I have all these issues, and I know why I have all these issues. So what do? The therapist just like, I don't know. And you know, apply that to society and it might work for a bit. We have a lot of issues that need to be diagnosed, but if nothing comes of it, then it's just an academic dick measuring contest. As critical theory deconstructs, as it gets more and more complicated, it can only really be understood in the concept of a university education. The layman, the average knuckle dragger, is not going to pay attention to critical theory. Seriously, pause this video and read this excerpt from Frankfurt School founder Theodor Adorno's book, Minima Moralia, and just tell me if you can understand anything that's going on here by just reading it with no understanding of critical theory. But how does this relate to you having to read a essay every time you go to an art gallery? For that, we have to look at the relationship of critical theory to the very concept of how a university operates in 2023. This brings us to dominant ideas. You'd think the concept of a dominant idea would be self-explanatory. It's just an idea that's dominant, right? Wrong, you mouth breather. This is art, Chad, and nothing is self-explanatory. Nothing is easy. Everything I want to understand is hard. Nothing makes sense anymore. A dominant idea is an idea that validates the use of power. An idea that justifies the existence of the institution that the idea came from. Now, none of us are smart enough to understand that, so let's use an example. Imagine you go to an Ivy League college for 8 years and graduate with a doctorate in political science. You use your higher education to get a job as a political correspondent for a major news outlet. You ace this job. You are the best political correspondent there ever was, and you always thank your higher education for giving you the skill set to do so. Because during your studies, you were taught about the importance of a higher education and how valuable it is for the job you do. After a long career as a political correspondent, you retire and work as a professor at the college you got your degree from to train the next generation of political correspondents. You teach them the importance of education just like you were taught the importance of education from the institution you work at, and that cycle repeats itself indefinitely, with the college college education system constantly telling itself how important it is. However, at no point is it ever proven why a college education is important. You are simply told it is important, and that concept becomes a dominant idea, an idea that justifies the existence of the institution it came from. A university would never teach anyone that it isn't important. Dominant ideas always win. It's like making a great argument and then telling someone like, oh, but I'm a fucking idiot, don't trust me. It's beta and weak and there's no room for it. Now let's take what we've learned. We have critical theory, the process of endless deconstruction of everything as a power dynamic, and something that can only truly be understood in the context of a university education, coupled with the fact that universities justify their own existence through dominant ideas. Now you can begin to see what I'm saying. Universities will always prop up critical theory because it's a complicated concept that justifies the existence of the education in the first place. We begin to see how this applies to art. If art didn't pretend to be complicated, if art didn't pretend like it needed to be understood, then art schools wouldn't exist. But this is a new phenomenon. Art wasn't always like this. Marcel Duchamp, famous Dada artist from the early 20th century, would never talk about his work, would never explain what his work was about. He would leave it open to interpretation for the viewer to understand. Same thing with Salvador Dali, Edward Hopper, Andy Warhol. You think you walked into a Edward Hopper exhibition and were greeted with a 10-page artist statement about the like temporality of modernity or some academic shit like that? No. The work spoke for itself. It created its own myths, had its own aura, and it still does. This is why we remember artists like Edward Hopper or Salvador Dali or Andy Warhol. This is why their work is in the history books. It's still subjective and it's still open for interpretation. It didn't have to justify its own existence. It didn't have to beg and plead to be understood like a whiny teenager. Now, next time you're in a gallery and some slack-jawed artist gives a 2-hour presentation divulging the most minute detail of their psyche and their process of all their work, point at them and tell them to shut the fuck up, because that's not the artist's job. A director doesn't open a movie by showing you the ending and then explaining how you should feel. Neither should artists. And as for you, the artist, how do you move forward knowing this? Just say less, bro.